Hey guys, Adam here with AmericanTrucks.com. Today we're taking a closer look at and installing the MotoFab 3-inch front leveling kit available for the 07 to 18 Silverado 1500. You should be checking this out if you're looking for three things: increasing ground clearance at the front end up to 3 inches, fitting larger wheels and tires on your truck comfortably up to 33 inches without rubbing, and if you're looking to eliminate factory rake, leveling out your truck's appearance. Now first let's tackle that. Now off the factory line, your truck has what's known as rake. Basically, your front suspension sits lower than your rear to help with towing and hauling applications. Now a lot of guys out there may not like the look of that and want to level things out a bit, bringing the front end up to match the rear, in which case a 3-inch leveling kit at the front end with a factory rear suspension does just that. It eliminates the factory rake, evening that stance out, which I think, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, gives it a better appearance and an overall more aggressive look. Fitting larger wheels and tires on your Silverado does tend to be pretty difficult with the square wheel wells on a factory suspension. Fitting up to 33s, you do have some rubbing on a factory suspension without lifting it at all. Now, if you're looking to fit larger wheels and tires like that, a leveling kit is going to be the way to go. It gives you just enough room at the front end to fit up to 33 inches, and we'll show you guys that in just a little bit, which is going to make it so that you don't have any rubbing at full turn. Now, if you're looking to fit 35s on your truck, you are going to need a larger lift kit, 6 inches or more, in order to prevent any modifications necessary and in order to prevent any rubbing. Now, if you are looking to put 33s on a factory suspension, there is some cutting involved. If you're looking to avoid that, a 3-inch leveling kit like this from MotoFab is plenty of room to make it work. In the shop today, we have a 2013 Silverado behind me, and we're going to be showing you guys what this looks like with the factory suspension on factory 31-inch tires, 275 55/20s, and we're going to show you guys what it looks like with the 3-inch lift kit with those same factory tires and aftermarket 33s to show you guys how they fit. Finally, ground clearance is also a factor. Now, the Silverado here, like the one we have behind me, isn't necessarily the most off-road vehicle with a factory suspension. Adding 3 inches of lift at the front end, though, allows you to go over some of the smaller obstacles on and off-road that you may not have otherwise been able to go over with a factory suspension. 3 inches might not sound like a lot of room, but 3 inches is going to be enough to go over some of those smaller obstacles, especially when it comes to going over with that front lip. The factory front bumper has that air dam or air lip at the front end that does hang down pretty low, and this can bring that up 3 inches. Physically, these spacers are CNC laser cut steel with a black powder coated finish on top to help with corrosion and rust resistance. The nice thing about the MotoFab kit here is that the threads are not powder coated, which means you don't have to worry about cross threading the bolts. They really take good care of manufacturing these products. And just know, out of the box, the physical spacer measures in at 2 inches of material. That, in combination with the changes in suspension geometry and spring compression, will result in the final lift height of 3 inches. So even though the kit is 2 inches physically, your final lift height at the front will be 3 inches. The price tag for this kit's going to come in right around $100, making them a pretty affordable mod at the front end. And sometimes you can even cut costs with some of the other options out there that may be a aluminum or a more plastic material. Steel is definitely the way to go if you're looking for the most durable option out there, which does cost a little bit more, right around $100. Install, I'm giving 2 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. Anybody can tackle this in the driveway at home with the right hand tools on deck, and I'll walk you through that entire process here. The nice thing is you don't need a spring compressor or any specialty tools like that, because the spacer kit from MotoFab sits at the top of your factory strut. No need to disassemble the strut, which means you don't need a spring compressor. So that's going to make life a lot easier. I'm going to walk you through the process. What do you say we get started? Tools used in the install include an air impact gun, cordless impact, a ratchet, 10, 15, 17, and a couple of 21mm deep sockets, Allen key and an 8mm hex socket, extension, panel removal tool, hammer, 15mm wrench, and an 18mm ratcheting wrench, and a pry bar. First step for the uninstall is obviously pretty simple. Put your truck up in the air, whether it be a lift or on the ground. Make sure it's supported properly. Pop the wheel off and grab an impact gun. We're going to use a 10mm socket here to remove the brake line or ABS line brackets from the hub itself and from the upper control arm, so let's do that next. All right, so here we're going to start on the top of our hub assembly. Use your 10 to get that off. And what I like to do is just pop that bracket off and put the 10mm right back in so we don't lose it. Do the same thing for the upper control arm. Next up, we're going to remove our sway bar end link. You're going to put your 15mm socket on the bolt head up top. And I'm going to use an extension on that, along with a 15 wrench to hold the bolt on the bottom. Next up, we're going to loosen and remove the upper control arm ball joint nut, connecting it to the knuckle. Now, in some cases, you'll try to loosen this up and the entire ball joint will spin with it. If that is the case, you can put an Allen key, the appropriate size Allen key, on the bottom of the stud here to hold it in place as you work it off. I recommend using an 18mm ratcheting wrench. All right, what I like to do when I get to the bottom is just make sure the nut is on a couple of threads, but just hand tight. We're gonna have to use a hammer to dislodge the upper control arm from the knuckle. All right, so it's loose, but hand tight. Keep that on there, grab a hammer. Now when you hit this with a hammer, you do not wanna make contact with the upper control arm. You wanna make contact with the knuckle there. I'm gonna do it on the opposite side just because there's more room to work with, but just know that this, on the opposite side, is where I'm hitting. There you go. Now what I recommend doing is using a pry bar to pry down on the upper control arm. Go in there with your fingers and take that nut off, and carefully lift the upper control arm out of position. Just like that. I'm gonna thread the nut back on so we don't lose it. Switch over to a 21mm deep socket and let's get off our tie rod end. All right, again, we may need a hammer to get that guy out. Next up, we're going to remove the bottom strut bolts. There are two 15mm bolt heads on the bottom. You guys are going to see that coming out from the top there. I'm going underneath with my 15 deep socket and getting them both off. Keep in mind when the second one comes out, this thing is going to start to lower down, so just watch your head. Last step here is going to be the 3 nuts at the top of the strut tower. Unfortunately, there is a harness connected to the front nut there, along with both in the back. Grab your panel removal tool and just pry those guys off. All right, one down, repeat that for the other 2 in the back. Switching back to that 18mm ratcheting wrench to get those 3 nuts off. All right, repeat that for the other 2 in the back. All right, at this point, the strut's free, you can pull it out. Next up, we basically have to assemble the spacer to the strut. Before we can actually mount it to the strut, we have to install the new studs. The new studs are gonna go through the bottom and stick up through the top, and these are gonna help hold the entire strut assembly to the strut tower in the vehicle. Your factory studs are gonna hold the strut to the spacer. Grab the new studs, put them through the bigger holes on the bottom. I'm gonna thread them through by hand, a couple of threads in each one of these larger holes. All right, once you have those in a couple of threads, make sure they're not cross-threaded. Grab an 8mm hex socket or Allen key and tighten those down. Now we can mount this to the strut. All right, it only goes on one way, so you want to just rotate it until it drops in. Just like that. From there, grab the nylon lock nuts included in the kit, put them in the holes. I'm going to use a 17mm deep socket to help thread those guys onto the studs. Make sure you have all of them on before you tighten any down. Okay, from there, grab your impact gun, attach it to that 17, and tighten all 3 of those down. Perfect. Now we can throw the entire assembly back in the truck. All right, next up we can take the new assembly, put it right back through the truck, and mount it up to the strut tower. Grab one of the factory nuts and put it up on the new studs going through the strut tower. All right, now we can mount it back up to the bottom. All right, now that we have that back in, grab your factory 15mm bolts and put them back through. All right, just to quickly show you guys what I just did and explain that. So in some cases, the mount at the bottom of the strut will sit at a harsher angle than you need it to in order to line up flush with a lower control arm mount. Now, in order to get that right, I basically popped off this threaded clip and used a flathead screwdriver to pry it into position while tightening the other bolt down. Once this bolt became tight, this automatically lines up so I can put the nut back on and tighten this one down like you normally would. All right, next up we have our truck lowered down to the ground. I'm basically going to use a hydraulic floor jack to jack up the lower control arm to meet our upper control arm. Next, I'm taking the nut off of our upper control arm. I'm going to lift up on our knuckle here. I'm going to use a pry bar to pry down on the upper control arm to put the stud through the knuckle. Next, I'm grabbing my 18mm ratcheting wrench to tighten down that nut. All right, insert your tie rod end into the knuckle. Put the nut on the bottom. This is another case where the ball joint might spin, in which case you may need a 10mm socket to hold that stud steady. All right, I'm going to use my wrench to hold the nut, 10mm socket on the stud. All right, next up we can do our sway bar end link. You want to slide the bushing on top first, follow it up with the nut, and then grab your 15 socket and wrench and tighten them down. Next up, we can reattach our ABS line bracket to the knuckle and to the upper control arm. Last couple of steps here, we're gonna reinstall the top 3 nuts on our strut tower. At this point, guys, you want to make sure you're looking up the torque specs for each one of the bolts on your specific year, make, and model Silverado. Torque down all of those bolts to spec. Of course, you're going to need to get an alignment once this is done, but from here, repeat on the other side, and you're good to go. That's going to wrap up my review and install for the MotoFab 3-inch front leveling kit available for the 07 to 18 Silverado 1500. Get yours right here at AmericanTrucks.com.